Zachary Taylor was a war hero turned U.S. president, respected, tough, and unafraid to defy powerful enemies. But just 16 months into his term, he died suddenly after a 4th of July celebration. Officially, it was a stomach illness. But whispers of poisoning and conspiracy began almost immediately. What if his death wasn't natural at all? What if the 12th President of the United States was silently erased from history because he stood in the way? Before he was president, before he was a household name, Zachary Taylor was just another military man stationed on the outer edges of the American frontier. Born in 1784 in Virginia, but raised in the rough backwoods of Kentucky, Taylor grew up in a world defined by survival, hard labor, and war. His early life was shaped by the spirit of the American Revolution and the belief in a young nation's manifest destiny. Quiet, unpretentious, and physically imposing, he entered the U.S. Army in 1808, a time when serving in uniform was neither glamorous nor particularly rewarding. Taylor first gained attention in the War of 1812, holding his ground at Fort Harrison against a siege of native forces, earning him his first recognition as a tough, determined commander. Over the next 3 decades, Taylor continued to serve across the country, in the Black Hawk War and the Seminole Wars, slowly building a reputation among his men as a no-nonsense leader who didn't shy away from danger and led from the front. He wasn't polished, didn't speak like a statesman, and rarely aligned himself with politics, but soldiers loved him. He ate what they ate, slept where they slept, and earned the nickname Old Rough and Ready for his humble appearance and dogged endurance. His defining moment came during the Mexican-American War, 1846 to 1848. When President Polk sent American troops to the disputed Texas border, Taylor was the general in charge. He defeated superior Mexican forces at the Battle of Palo Alto, the Battle of Resaca de la Palma, and the stunning Battle of Buena Vista, where his outnumbered forces repelled a major assault. These victories electrified the American public. Newspapers made him a legend. Suddenly, a man who had never given a political speech in his life was being urged to run for the highest office in the land. Ironically, Taylor had never even voted in an election. He viewed politics with suspicion. But the Whig Party, desperate for a charismatic figure to challenge Democratic power, seized on his popularity. Despite not knowing much about the Whigs or their platform, Taylor was nominated for president in 1848. His appeal was simple. He was a war hero who represented honesty, courage, and stability. He didn't need to speak like a politician. His battlefield record spoke for him. Against all odds, Zachary Taylor won the presidency. But what lay ahead wasn't glory. It was a storm. Zachary Taylor's presidency began in March 1849, but from the moment he stepped into the White House, it was clear he was a different kind of president. He wasn't refined. He wasn't ideological. He wasn't even deeply familiar with Washington's elite. But he had one unwavering belief. The Union must be preserved at all costs. Taylor inherited a country on the brink of explosion. The Mexican-American War had just ended, and the U.S. had acquired vast new territories in the West. But this victory came with a curse, the burning question of whether slavery would be allowed to expand into the new states. Southerners, many of them slaveholders like Taylor himself, believed they had a right to bring slaves into the West. Northern politicians and abolitionists bitterly opposed the expansion of slavery into new territories. Everyone assumed that Taylor, a Southern slaveholder, would side with the South. They were wrong. Taylor took a surprising and defiant stand. He refused to allow slavery to expand into territories where it did not already exist. He wasn't an abolitionist, but he believed strongly that new states should be allowed to decide for themselves, and more importantly, he saw disunion as treason. When Southern leaders began to threaten secession, Taylor met their bluster with steel. He publicly declared that he would personally lead the U.S. Army to crush any rebellion, stating that anyone taken in rebellion against the Union would be hanged with less reluctance than he had hanged deserters and spies in Mexico. It was a stunning rebuke from a president many Southerners thought was their ally. Behind closed doors, whispers of discontent grew louder. Pro-slavery politicians were enraged that Taylor wouldn't bend to their demands. Some believed he had betrayed his class and his region, and unlike seasoned politicians who knew how to navigate the treacherous backrooms of Washington, Taylor was unpolished. He said what he meant, and he didn't make deals. Despite the mounting political pressure, Taylor stood firm. He blocked efforts to compromise with Southern leaders on the extension of slavery, vetoed proposed laws, and backed California's bid to enter the Union as a free state, infuriating Southern elites even more. His own cabinet was divided, and Congress was in turmoil. Yet in the face of chaos, Taylor remained unshaken. But he would not live to finish the battle he had started. It was July 4, 1850, and the nation was celebrating its 74th birthday. Washington, D.C. was buzzing with patriotic fervor. Parades, cannon fire, speeches, and masses of people gathered in the stifling summer heat. President Zachary Taylor, ever dutiful, attended the ceremonies, listening to speeches in the blistering sun for hours at the Washington Monument grounds. Hot, fatigued, and parched, Taylor returned to the White House late in the day. There, in an attempt to cool down, he consumed what many historians believe to be a deadly mix of food and drink. A large bowl of cherries, followed by iced milk and chilled water. While such refreshments seemed harmless, the water in 1850 Washington was notoriously unsanitary, often contaminated by sewage, and milk unrefrigerated and easily spoiled. By the next day, Taylor began suffering from severe cramps, diarrhea, nausea, and fever, classic symptoms of acute gastroenteritis. At first, doctors believed it was a simple case of indigestion or food poisoning, but as the hours dragged on, his condition rapidly worsened. Despite being treated by the best physicians available, their remedies were crude by modern standards: bloodletting, opium-based treatments, and mercury-laced calomel, all of which may have hastened his decline. Taylor's illness persisted with unrelenting agony for 5 days. He drifted in and out of consciousness, unable to eat or recover. Finally, on the evening of July 9, 1850, just 16 months into his presidency, Zachary Taylor died. His official cause of death was listed as cholera morbus, a vague 19th century term that covered everything from dysentery to food poisoning. The public mourned. Newspapers praised his service. But almost immediately, whispers began to spread. How could a robust, battle-hardened general who had survived decades of war die so quickly, just from eating cherries and drinking milk? In the days following his death, rumors began circulating that Zachary Taylor had not died of natural causes at all, but had been deliberately poisoned. Many found it suspicious that Taylor, a Southern slaveholder who had become an unexpected enemy of pro-slavery factions, had died at the precise moment when the country stood on a knife's edge. He had vowed to block the expansion of slavery, oppose the Compromise of 1850, and publicly warned secessionists that he would crush any rebellion. His political enemies, including prominent Southern senators, had both motive and influence. These suspicions weren't only rooted in politics, they were fed by history. Other political poisonings had occurred around the world, and Taylor's sudden, unexplained death after a confrontation with powerful interests raised red flags. Many pointed out that the symptoms of arsenic poisoning, nausea, stomach pain, vomiting, and diarrhea, closely resembled the symptoms Taylor experienced. Others speculated about the contaminated food or drink served to him, noting that several of his staff had also fallen ill, though they survived. The most damning suggestion came from the aftermath. Vice President Millard Fillmore, who succeeded Taylor, was a staunch supporter of the Compromise of 1850, a series of laws that appeased the South and strengthened slavery's hold. Within months of Taylor's death, the Compromise passed, a political reversal Taylor would have never allowed. This dramatic shift in national policy only deepened suspicions. For over a century, the cause of Taylor's death remained one of history's unanswered questions. But in 1991, one woman, Clara Rising, a former humanities professor, pushed the question back into public light. Convinced that Taylor had been murdered, she petitioned for his body to be exhumed and tested using modern forensic science. For more than 140 years, Zachary Taylor's death remained officially attributed to natural causes, either cholera morbus or acute gastroenteritis, but the rumors never faded. Too many loose threads, too much political fallout, and a leader too strong-willed to be conveniently removed by nature. In the late 1980s, Clara Rising, a determined academic and former humanities professor from the University of Florida, revived the theory that Taylor had been poisoned by pro-slavery conspirators. She gathered medical evidence, political context, and historical inconsistencies, then made a bold move. She petitioned the government to exhume Zachary Taylor's remains for forensic testing. Surprisingly, her request was granted. In June 1991, under tight security and media attention, the body of President Zachary Taylor was exhumed from his mausoleum in Louisville, Kentucky. Forensic pathologists took hair, bone, and fingernail samples, which were then sent to the Oak Ridge National Laboratory for advanced testing, searching for traces of arsenic, the poison most often suspected. The nation waited. Was this going to become one of the greatest political assassinations in U.S. history? When the results came back, they were inconclusive, but controversial. While forensic scientists found traces of arsenic in Taylor's remains, the amount was far below lethal levels. They concluded that the levels were consistent with background exposure from the 19th century, common in everything from medicines to wallpaper. Still, critics questioned the scope of the tests. Could poisons have degraded? Were they testing the right parts of the body? Did 140 years of decomposition erase the evidence? Despite the official verdict that no foul play could be proven, the exhumation did not silence the conspiracy. It revived it. The timing of Taylor's death, his powerful political enemies, and the sweeping changes that followed still leave many historians and theorists convinced. Taylor may have died for standing against slavery. In a country that remembers presidents for their speeches, wars, or landmark legislation, Zachary Taylor has largely vanished from public memory. He has no memorials on the National Mall. Few schools bear his name. Most Americans can't recall his party or even his face. Why? The answer lies not only in the brevity of his presidency, just 16 months, but also in what happened after. With Taylor gone, Vice President Millard Fillmore reversed many of Taylor's policies. He supported the Compromise of 1850, allowing slavery to expand under legal protection and appeasing Southern leaders. This shift rewrote the trajectory of the nation. The anti-slavery resistance Taylor might have inspired was snuffed out before it could rise. Moreover, Taylor left behind no personal writings, no political manifesto, and no presidential legacy plan. He wasn't a man of speeches. He was a man of action. And once gone, there were few in Washington willing to preserve the story of a general president who had defied both sides. Worse still, he was soon overshadowed by far more dramatic presidencies: Lincoln and the Civil War, Grant and Reconstruction, Roosevelt and Reform. In contrast, Taylor became a historical footnote, seen as a transitional figure, not a transformational one. But as modern historians dig deeper, some are beginning to ask, what if he had lived? Could he have stopped the drift toward war? Could he have delayed the bloodshed that tore the country apart just a decade later? In dying suddenly, Zachary Taylor may not have vanished by accident, but by design. And history, ever written by the victors and survivors, simply let him fade. In recent years, historians have begun to re-examine Zachary Taylor, not just as a short-term president, but as a potentially critical figure in America's darkest hour. The narrative of a simple military man dying of bad milk has started to erode under deeper scrutiny. What's emerging is the profile of a leader whose principles may have put him in mortal danger. Taylor's presidency was built not on political polish, but on a raw, unshakable loyalty to the Union. He wasn't eloquent, but he was decisive. He didn't cater to party lines, and that independence likely cost him political allies. But it also gave him integrity. He refused to bow to pro-slavery extremists, even though he owned slaves himself. He believed in the Constitution above sectional interests, and he would not tolerate treason, regardless of who threatened it. That alone makes him an outlier among presidents from the South during that period. If Taylor had lived, some historians argue the Compromise of 1850 might never have passed. That legislation, which allowed for the capture of escaped slaves, opened new territories to slavery, and increased tensions between North and South, may have been blocked by Taylor's veto. His hardline stance could have bought the nation more time to find a peaceful solution. Or he could have accelerated confrontation and forced the slavery issue into the open a decade earlier. Either way, his early death changed everything. His story isn't just about a forgotten death. It's about how history is shaped not just by those who act, but by those who are silenced. Zachary Taylor's body lies in a quiet Kentucky cemetery, his tomb visited more by curiosity than reverence. His presidency is barely taught in classrooms. His portrait rarely hangs in government buildings. He is, for most Americans, a name without a narrative, but the facts remain chilling. He stood in the way of powerful men. He died suddenly. His successor did the very things he vowed to stop, and no definitive cause of death was ever proven. Perhaps it wasn't just cherries and milk that killed the 12th President of the United States. Perhaps it was politics. Perhaps it was power. And perhaps Zachary Taylor didn't just vanish from history, he was erased from it.